Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. Today we're unpacking a really fascinating philosophical framework. It suggests that humanity is currently undergoing this massive, mandatory upgrade to our internal hardware and software, just so we can survive the sheer complexity of the modern world. If you've ever felt like your brain is running an outdated operating system while trying to process everything going on today, well, the source material we're exploring offers a profound, almost cosmic explanation for why that is. And more importantly, it talks about how we're supposedly evolving to actually fix it.
Okay, so here's our roadmap for today. We're going to cover the universal human question, limits of everyday life, the synthesis perspective, application in daily life, key insights for transformation, and we'll wrap up with some reflection and final thoughts. Let's get right into it.
Section 1. The Universal Human Question. Is our hardware outdated? We're starting with a dilemma that pretty much all of us feel. Why are we so fundamentally overwhelmed by modern life?
We usually just assume that our biology and our consciousness have reached their final form, right? We think of human evolution as this closed chapter in a biology textbook, but the source material proposes a radically different perspective. It suggests that we are actually right in the middle of a monumental evolutionary leap. According to the texts, those everyday feelings of burnout and overwhelm, they aren't personal failures at all. They're literally the symptoms of an entire species outgrowing its current physical and psychological framework.
Moving on to Section 2, Limits of Everyday Life. Operating on an outdated system. Let's really look at the problem we run into when we try to process today's reality.
So, the source material highlights this absolutely striking statistic, claiming that nearly 50% of people today suffer from some degree of depression or deep mental fatigue. And you have to ask, why? Well, it's because our old internal systems are clashing violently with a rapidly progressing, incredibly complex environment. The text suggests that the framework we've relied on for centuries is basically collapsing under the weight of what it calls informational collapse.
To break that down, the text says we've been operating as a three-part human. Historically, we've defined ourselves through the mind, the heart, and the soul. And the sources use this brilliant analogy here. They compare this to an old fable, where a swan, a crab, and a pike are all tied to the same cart, but they're pulling in completely different directions. The mind pulls toward logic, the heart pulls toward emotion, and the soul is just searching for deeper meaning. The result? The human cart is entirely stuck. It's kind of like trying to power a massive modern city using a tiny three-cylinder engine. To handle the modern world, the texts argue we actually need an internal system that functions more like a quantum computer.
Section 3. The Synthesis Perspective. Entering the Epoch of Fire. This brings us to the core paradigm shift of the source material. Now, the crucial thing to understand here is that synthesis isn't just a basic word, meaning putting things together. In this context, it's a fundamental esoteric framework. The source draws this really striking parallel to astrophysics. Think about a star. A star only survives because the outward pushing force of thermonuclear synthesis perfectly balances out the crushing inward pull of gravity. If that synthesis stops, the star just collapses and dies. The texts argue that humanity is facing a very similar crushing pressure from modern life right now, without activating an internal synthesis, which means deeply integrating all of our diverse parts into one unified whole. We are risking societal and psychological collapse.
According to the texts, humanity has actually evolved through specific historical epochs, and each one developed a different capacity. So, the Lemurian era focused on energy in the physical body. Then, the Atlantean era developed light and emotional capacity. After that, the previous era, known as the fifth root race, developed the mind and spirit. But now the sources claim we are shifting into what's called the Epoch of Fire. This is an entirely new era that demands a level of energetic and psychological capacity where all those previous developments are synthesized together. And this evolutionary upgrade demands a huge transition. We have to move from being an old three-part being where, maybe you're highly logical but emotionally stunted, or deeply empathetic but lack critical thinking, into a highly complex 64-part human. The texts even claim that children being born today naturally possess this 64-part complexity right from the start. That means we need a completely new, holistic approach to education and development, instead of the fragmented methods we used in the past.
Drawing on its roots in Russian cosmism, the framework posits this completely mind-bending concept. The micro-world of our biology is deeply mathematically connected to the macro-world of the cosmos. The source argues that the proportional distance between the atoms in our cells literally mirrors the vast distances between the stars in the universe.
In this worldview, you aren't just living inside the universe is mapped out right inside of you. So tapping into your internal potential is exactly the same as tapping into cosmic potential.
Section 4. Application in daily life. Running the new software. Now, you might be thinking, okay, this is incredibly abstract.
How do we actually run this new software in our daily lives without getting lost in all the esoteric philosophy? I mean, how does a 64-part human navigate going to work, raising kids, or just making everyday decisions? Well, the texts outline a highly practical sequence for this transformation. First, we have to actively accumulate diverse experiences: reading, connecting, feeling, learning. Second, we have to synthesize them deeply within our core, finding the common threads so our logic and our emotions actually align. And third, which is absolutely crucial, we have to apply that upgraded understanding by taking action in the physical world and serving others. Because, according to this material, growth only happens when the inner knowledge you've accumulated is given back to the community.
When we actually apply this sequence, we begin to see some very tangible, real-world benefits. By embracing this model, the text argues that we shift to what it calls synthesis hemisphere thinking. So instead of your right brain fighting your left brain all the time, they function as a single unified unit. And that allows you to process immense informational complexity without totally burning out. It improves your relationship dynamics too, because you're no longer projecting these fractured parts of yourself onto other people. Ultimately, the claim is that it leads to holistic physical and mental health, simply because your internal hardware is finally equipped to handle the insane demands of your environment.
Section 5. Key Insights for Transformation Synthesizing the Journey. Let's distill the most critical takeaways from this profound source material. To sum this all up, the paradigm impartially presents a universe where humanity is not at the end of its journey at all, but rather at this crucial pivot point. We're undergoing a mandatory evolutionary upgrade. We absolutely must transition from an outdated, conflicting 3-part system to a highly integrated 64-part capacity. It teaches us that the macrocosm and microcosm, our inner reality that our outer reality, are deeply intertwined. And finally, true human growth requires the synthesis of every single one of our capabilities. We can't leave any part of ourselves behind. Section 6. Reflection and Final Thoughts. Your role in the Metagalaxy. As we wrap up this explainer, we want to look at what this all means for you. There's this quote directly from the source that I think beautifully encapsulates the immense responsibility and the potential that the synthesis system places on the individual. The framework completely flips the traditional narrative. So rather than humans just being insignificant specks floating in a giant universe, it says the entire metagalaxy is actually focused inward, culminating right in the individual. Your personal development, your internal synthesis, literally shapes the outer world.
So, we leave you with this final provocative thought. If the space between your atoms reflects the space between the stars, and if your internal growth is truly the key to humanity's next evolutionary leap, are you ready to run the new software? What scattered pieces of your life, your mind, and your heart are you going to synthesize today? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep learning, keep questioning, and keep synthesizing.